For those of you who don't know me, I'm Paul Payton. I'm the Dean of the Law School, and thanks very much for coming this afternoon. Ordinarily, I tend to wander, but because we're actually videoing this for those who can't be here, and a lot of alumni and students, of course, who are otherwise occupied at this time of year, who weren't able to be here, wanted to understand what was being said and what was going on. So we're having that recorded. I'm going to stay static at the podium, work with this microphone, and then as questions are being asked later on, we should have a wandering mic go. So we'll ask for your patience in terms of getting a microphone to you so that we can make sure that the questions are recorded even if you don't show up on camera. I appreciate, especially given exam season, that it's a very difficult time of year, and this visible show of support is really important and very much appreciated. I also wanted to note that I had called for a town hall meeting in my email last Friday morning, and the LSA had also called for a town meeting, so really this is a joint effort in that regard, and I appreciate with both Scott and Durham the opportunity to join forces for one session this afternoon. In terms of an agenda, really only three things. First, I thought it might be helpful for me to provide some direct background and an update. I know that there are a lot of rumors flying. This is one of the joys and one of the hazards of social media, so in that respect at least, if I'm the horse, here's the mouth, and I'll be able to actually speak to a number of the things that have been going on. Second, I'll give an opportunity for the LSA leadership and also Andrea, the leader of the student petition, to speak and to address you. And third, really an opportunity for you to have your voices heard. In advance of the meeting this afternoon, I'd actually had a very good meeting with Andrea Baylor, who presented me with a copy of the petition as it stood at that point. I know the petition's still open, their signatures are being added. I know that others have signed it as well, and I want to come back to the petition and our discussion a little later, as I think it's important to understand and really appreciate the approach and the message. Andrea and I had a very constructive conversation about the intention and the direction of the petition itself, and I think that message is really important and best that you hear from Andrea directly. Almost without exception, the student response has been not inflammatory. The tone and approach has been one of concern, remorse, regret, and a sincere desire to support Steve and to see if anything might be done. And I think it's important to note that in that regard, at least, I'm approaching this session as a discussion and a conversation. I think it's no secret that I've been impressed, and those of you who heard me on CBC this morning will note that I particularly wanted to emphasize how much I've appreciated the thoughtful and sensitive approach that students especially have adopted in writing to me, speaking with me, and otherwise engaging in dialogue about their concerns. It's impressive, and I think really important that people both understand and appreciate the sensitivities, but also, as very effective advocates, have made very strongly known their feelings, their position, their experience, and telling those stories has been really important. I think the other thing that's really important in this kind of context and circumstance as well, in my discussion with the student leadership, with Andrea, with others, is that the situation is complex. That information, particularly on social media, is imperfect and incomplete, and that there are sensitivities at all levels that need to be respected, and I remain grateful for that. I'm not sure that anyone here has a full picture as of 5 o'clock this afternoon. So let me try and provide you with an overview of where I understand things stand. It may anticipate and respond to some of the questions that you might have, and hopefully address things for where we're hoping to go forward. I was hoping to be in a slightly more advanced position, but we'll get back to that. As I advised by email last Friday, and I know there are a number of alumni in the group who have been hearing things or reading things on social media or otherwise, so you might not have seen the email. As of today, actually, I asked for a tab on the web page for the law school. So from the front page of the law school web page, there's a link to anything media or otherwise that is available with respect to this issue and the matter, and I'm going to post the media stories there, depending on approaches, the petition, and then any other news or notices going forward so that everybody's working from the same page. As I advised by email last Friday, I had learned last Thursday that Steve had advised Assistant Dean Melissa Hartley that he'd received a notice regarding the end of his lease from Facilities and Operations. Facilities issues fall directly within the Assistant Dean Administration's portfolio, and the lease itself is within the university. So we're sort of in the meat and the sandwich here, if you will. As I also indicated in that email, the matter of commercial lease terms, contract performance, expectations are sensitive, not within our control. And since that note, I've been able to confirm, at least, and been able to share that it was a 3-year lease signed while Dean Bryden was law school dean, that it had no renewal clause, no option to renew. I'm not aware of any discussions at that time about termination or plans for renewal, or any reason why the lease would not have, in the ordinary course, included a renewal clause or terms. I've worked in a different world in terms of commercial litigation previously, and I know that university and other leases will work differently, so I don't have additional background on that. As you may have seen in the Edmonton Journal this morning, the university referenced in the letter the intention to repurpose the space, but the university has denied that there's a plan in place for the cafe, including any plan for a Starbucks. I'm not sure where that rumor started, it's understandable. But the university has denied that. I am not aware of actually any plans for the space, and one of the things that has concerned me throughout is the importance of ensuring that there is actually a cafe and a service, and I'll come back to the particular focus on Steve in a moment, but that as a community, we need a facility in this building. That directing people to Hub Mall is insufficient and inappropriate, and that in terms of the law school community, the need for that kind of service on site is extremely important. The vendor is also extremely important, and I'll come back to that. As I noted as well on CBC Radio this morning, the commercial providers who'd actually occupied the space prior to Steve had actually left it as not being commercially viable. That opened the opportunity when ex-Dean Percy had recruited Steve to come in and set up the space. He had previously been at Java Jive, and that's where the story began in terms of Steve's involvement in the law school. Many of you will know that far better than me. But beyond any kind of commercial lease considerations, there's much more to consider. And that's been the focus of the overwhelming majority of the notes that I've received from students, faculty, alumni. The outpouring of support for the intangible contributions that Steve has made to the law school community have been conveyed very strongly by you to me and from me to the university's central administration. Started off as an advocate for a reason. And so in that respect, at least, it's important to note that this isn't an us, and I have never positioned this as an us versus them kind of approach. I've tried to engage in a constructive dialogue with the university's central administration to work on a solution, to ensure that the dialogue is constructive, forward-looking, and appreciates the sensitivities and the kind of response that, frankly, I anticipated last Friday and that has exploded since. As I also noted in the Metro report, even at a time of fiscal constraint and pressures, one of the things that I think has, for me, as somebody new to the University of Alberta as a university and to this law school in particular, is the sense of community and the human face, which Steve in many ways so strongly represents. The care and concern he offers in many respects has been described as pastoral, as counselor, as friend, as anchor, as supporter, as advocate, as kind face. He has touched the lives of so many, and it's important that that continue. One of the notes from an alumna said, quote, "Caffeine may be flowing through the veins of everyone in the building, but Steve is the beating heart that keeps everyone going." The situation's been complex, but I've been working with the central administration in what I'm pleased to describe as a really constructive dialogue, in order to find a solution that's going to respond to the concerns and that will offer a mutually beneficial resolution. We're not there yet. And so I ask for your patience in that regard. I was hoping, certainly, to be able to be more advanced in this, but as you can appreciate, with things going from last Friday to today, they've moved very quickly. I've tried to move things along as fast as I can, day and evening calls to those who are responsible. So I'm optimistic that over the next week or so, we'll be able to arrive at a solution that I think people will be very happy with. I'm very pleased with the direction of the dialogue and the discussion. And as you can appreciate, things are sensitive. I can't get into all of those details at this stage. And as one of the students noted for me, Steve's primary concern right now has been for your success on your exams. And I'm hoping that with this discussion, with the efforts going on behind the scenes, we can refocus on that right now while I'm working on a resolution, and certainly I will announce as quickly as I can when that is resolved. So with those opening comments and introduction and background, I want to convey my thanks to all of you for writing, for coming, for expressing your support and actually providing that kind of insight and story that I think is so important to the success of the law school. As I indicated earlier in my opening comments, though, I've been working with the LSA and with the students on this. And so in that respect, at least, I want to turn to offer the opportunity to Andrea and to Scott and Durham now to address you. And then we'll come back and I think open it for questions and answers, for questions or at least comments in that regard. We will, as I've said, have a roving microphone and would ask for your patience so it can get to you so that you can be recorded for those who are not here. I thank you again for coming. We'll have the dialogue. I don't know, Andrea, if you want to come up and speak to the petition.
So it's not just me. So my name is Andrea Baylor. For lots of you probably don't know who I am. I'm a 2L student here. I'm not a part of the LSA, so this is pretty new for me. But I just want to say that while I was the person who wrote the petition, I was certainly not the only person involved in its initiative. There was a lot of discussions I had on Facebook with people prior, as soon as people knew they wanted to do something about it. And I was just I offered one way that they could do something about it as soon as they could, and to get their friends involved and to get alumni involved, which very shortly happened. So I want to thank everyone who has contributed something to this petition. I think that the stories that were given have made a huge impact. They were done very respectfully. I think they were done very convincingly. I think they generated a lot of positive energy. I know, speaking to Steve, reading some of them out loud to him, it's been hugely meaningful. And I think the number one reason this petition was started was to let people know how much we appreciate Steve. The gratitude we have for him and the things that he does for us, how important he is. And we wanted to not only let him know that, which I think we have done now successfully, but I think we also wanted to let everyone else know that. People in our community know that. People in the broader university community who we don't always talk to or see or know face to face. So I think that this petition has been a huge success on so many levels, and personally, I think it's been a lot about just sharing stories of how Steve has impacted us as individuals. And I know it's been really pleasurable for me to get to read everyone else's stories and realize that this person is not just so important to me, he's important to all of us. And that's just one more thing that ties us all together as a community. So on that note, I promised I would keep this short. So, and I'm not quite as eloquent as the dean at speaking. So I just want to say thank you very much for everything that you've done. Our efforts are still paying off, and they will, and I think that if you want to contribute signature comments, we're still open to accepting them. Please just keep it positive so that we can be as effective as we can have been so far. Thanks.
So first and foremost, we'd like to thank everyone, staff, students, and staff for your outstanding signs of support. So at this point, I guess we can speak to what the LSA is doing. The hard part about this is the LSA doesn't have a formal relationship with the University Central Administration. We're not institutionalized. We don't have seats on committees X, Y, Z. But what we can do, like right now the petition is very much the driving force for the advocacy and for the initiative. But what we can do for the LSA is basically have proxies. So this is through communication with the faculty. And then the second means of doing that is through the student union representatives, because they have a much more defined relationship with the University Central Administration. So we had about a half an hour long conversation with William Lau, who's the current Students Union president, basically just expressing everyone's thoughts that were conveyed in the petition, and then referring him to that so that they understand the gravity of what this issue, of how much this issue matters for law students. Yeah, so that's where our advocacy in terms of setting up the town hall, and then just information gathering and trying to see what we can get from our proxies through their committee spots.
I think we'd like to open up the floor to questions now. So if you want to, you guys can direct questions towards us, Andrea, or Dean Payton. I think there's supposed to be a wandering mic, so yeah. You can just raise your hand if you have a question.
Hi, my question is just, and this is for the Dean actually. I know that you can't give us details on the conversation that's going on with the university, but I wonder if you could go so far as to say whether at the end of the conversation you expect that there will be a plan for that space.
I thought the journalists were good. Let me go back to what I said earlier, which is my commitment and my primary concern has been to make sure that there is a cafe of the kind that we've actually all enjoyed and been part of and had as part of our community. I want to make sure that there's a plan for the space, if there is a plan, whether or not it actually continues the current vendor relationship or moves in a different direction, that ensures that the community has a space that responds to the kinds of needs that everybody's identified. So that's in terms of dealing with a plan. I think it's important to have something in place, and I'm very committed to working on something that's constructive, that's positive, and that, quite frankly, as far as I'm concerned, ends up respecting what people have been conveying, which is they not only appreciate what Steve himself offers by way of products, but what Steve himself provides. So I'm taking that into account in the dialogue. And as I said earlier on, I'm not in a position to announce anything further, but the conversations have been really constructive. I've been actually very, considering some of the dialogue that I've had this year, I've been pleasantly surprised, I think in many respects, that there has been as open an ear to the law school, to the community, and I think a lot of that stems from, as Andrea positioned it, the kind of positive energy, the stories, and the constructive engagement that people have been actually conveying. I mean, this is a story not just for the law school. It's a story for the university, it's a story for the city now, and in that respect, at least, it comes back to Steve. It's not about having, coffee or other provisions available in the space. So in that respect, at least, I'm answering your question, and I'm not answering your question at the same time. Spending 10 years as a litigator helps in that respect.
This is actually for Andrea. I'm just curious, how many people have signed the petition at this point?
So at last time I checked, which was 4:30, I was 1,404.
Okay, then I just have a comment. Oh, yeah. I just have a comment for the Dean, just to kind of hit home how much impact this has had. When you think of the average graduating class is roughly about 150-ish. I'm dealing in generalities here. And Steve's been around since about 2006-ish, so that means there's about 1,700 students and alumni who Steve has impacted. Now, if there's over 1,400 people who have signed this petition out of around 1,700, that means that this man has had a huge impact on everybody in this room and everybody who, well, most people who pass through these doors. And I'd say in ongoing discussions, that might be a kind of an extra consideration for the university.
Comment back on that, actually. I think there is, I was at Dean's Council this morning, and I think some of my colleagues there were actually really surprised, first off, to learn that there was a cafe in the law school. They may not get around much. But more importantly, there was that very visible impact and understanding about not only the fact that there's a cafe in the law school, but that there's Steve here. And I think in that regard, at least, as I said, I mean, part of the reason why I've been able to engage in even much more of a constructive dialogue is exactly that kind of impact. And I think in that respect, at least, people understand. And that's where, you know, telling the stories. And where I've really appreciated from students, from alumni, from the faculty members as well, where that kind of personal impact is had. People have had that kind of very personal storytelling and outpouring, and you know, that's not something that you take lightly in any kind of context and circumstance. And believe you me, what I've been doing is conveying the importance of that, and I've actually understood it better myself. As I said, I'm new to the community. When I was brought in for my interview, as some of you may be aware, one of the first visits I did was actually to Steve. I was, you know, introduced to him. I was told that the first coffee was free. The others wouldn't be. And so in that regard, at least, I had a sense and sensibility of the importance of the place and space, but more importantly, the person in that regard. And I think, yeah, the numbers, I mean, it's not exclusive to students, it's an open petition, but I think in terms of just the sheer volume of signatures, having been through, as some of you in the room in particular will know, some contentious issues last fall where there were petitions and protests and that sort of thing, the response here has been just incredible and overwhelming. And it's nice to be able to both convey that with strength and also appreciate it. I think it really actually tells the story of this community, and one of the things that as a new dean I've wanted to be able to do is help this community tell its story. Well, this is an important part of that.
If I could just ask a question. One thing that I want to know and that hasn't been brought up by anybody yet is what does Steve want to do? Because the way that this whole thing started was that note, and it just kind of said, use up your gift cards because my lease is ending. And then I feel that although we really appreciate Steve, that he's been doing this for a really long time, and frankly, I would understand it if he didn't want to do it forever. So has anyone like asked him that he still wants to continue doing the cafe?
Yeah, those handcuffs that are behind the counter, placed there by the class of 2000, no. In all seriousness, actually, that was when I was engaging in an email exchange with one of my faculty members last Friday morning who raised the concern. That was the first thing I asked. Was, you know, because in terms of understanding, again, trying to go back and understand, okay, first off, what are the terms of the lease? Why would there not be a renewal? You know, again, if you've got a vendor who's in that kind of place, what is the desire in that regard? So that's where I say the conversations are sensitive. And that's also where, I mean, I'm not representing Steve. I am a facilitator to dialogue between facilities and operations and to Steve, and, you know, to make sure that the interests of this community are represented in that respect. And that's where I'm also saying, you know, in part when you're, as you can appreciate, when you're into that kind of dialogue and discussion, many things can happen in terms of what people want or don't want, or as negotiations or discussions end up going forward. So that's why I'm saying I'm optimistic, but it involves people other than me. And in that respect, at least, I think we need to respect that, have the sensitivities to it. And Steve's focus right now has been communicated back to me directly by students and by others is, you know, we'll sort this out, let's focus on the exams and make sure that the focus really is on the community as a successful community. But it's a great question. It's extremely important. and I appreciate your asking it.
So I sat down with Steve the other day too, and I actually thought this was an awesome Steve moment as I asked him, what do you want? And he asked me what I wanted. And then we went back and forth about 4 times. So he's just like, if the students want me back, I would be glad to come back. So, and again, I think the petition speaks loud and clear as to like what the answer to that question is. So.
So my question is about a system that seems to be quite broken. We have a situation where a vendor was brought into a space that wasn't financially making it, and by request came in, opened up, and did more than just open up a coffee shop. He helped law students, particularly those of us that may have been deemed other. I went back to law school at 46 and graduated in 2012. Steve is what got me through my first year of law school. He was there every morning with a cup of coffee and a smile. He was a better man to me than my husband my first year of law school. Which is why I closed my office at 2:30 and drove from Wetaskiwin for Steve, which I also probably would not have done for my husband. So I think that's telling. But I am seriously concerned about a situation where you as the dean, the students, the LSA, and everybody is advised after the decision's all been made with no input from the law faculty or the dean or the students of the law school of what Steve provided or what service. If they had just asked the question before they canceled the lease, we wouldn't all be here. This wouldn't have gone down this way. So what's going to be done to fix a system that obviously does not work?
So it's in... One of the things, well, number one, I am not going to engage in any commentary on the domestic relations. Even I know where not to tread. I think in terms of the dialogue and the discussion between the faculty and the facilities and operations, I'm new to this process. As I said, there is responsibility directly with an assistant dean administration for that kind of dialogue around the space. This is not the first time that this faculty has had issues around facilities and operations in terms of the manner in which some renovations have taken place, a sliding door that won't close, trying to repurpose certain other things. And so, you know, one of the things that's interesting in terms of dealing with, and this is now counting the number of universities that I've been associated with, the University of Toronto had an Office of Space Management, which we thought actually should be out in space. Given the fact, at Queen's when I was there, the law school didn't even control its own classroom space. So other classes would be scheduled in it. This is not something that's unique in terms of the University of Alberta, and that's why my focus is really not only on just this situation, but on engaging in a constructive dialogue with the university about, you know, how do we do things better? We're at an interesting time in the university generally because there's all sorts of discussions around the manner in which on a going forward basis, you know, there are different models for operating, there are different ways in which budgets get managed and otherwise. And there's a discussion, I was part of this when I was at my last university in the US, which actually had 3 different campuses in 3 different cities, and the kind of complex facilities, relations, and management. I was there at a law school that actually controlled its own 13-acre campus, but had full responsibility for all of the facilities and operations and services, and had to kind of contract with the university. Things get done in different ways. I think by way of process here, could we have done better? Could I have done better? Absolutely. And I think in terms of that discussion, you know, it's been a learning experience for me, and I'll own that in front of everybody. That's why I'm trying to fix it in terms of this resolution, but also going forward. And so in that respect, at least, I appreciate the question, appreciate the drive in from Wetaskiwin, but also I think in terms of my own understanding of how we can do things better operationally, I've learned a lot out of this process, and I'm going to try and put that to work to make sure that we're in a better position. I've learned a lot as well from my colleagues in the central administration, and they actually have been, you know, this isn't me versus, someone was asking, you know, how's the man? I grew up after the 1960s, so I'm not exactly sure who that is at this point. But in dealing with the central administration, I think I've had a constructive understanding of their concerns. I'm just wanting to make sure that I convey the strength of conviction that everybody here has demonstrated. I think part of the answer is as well, though, and again, not trying to unpack too much history, you have to go back to the fact that, yes, he was brought here in 2006. There was a history in between. There was a lease negotiation that went on that I wasn't party to, that I don't know of, back in 2012, that extended a lease for a 3-year term. So in that respect, at least, I don't know, what went on at that time. I'm not privy to that. I'm focused on right now and on moving forward.
Since I've got the mic, I'll take a second and ask my own question.
Sure.
There was a little bit of talk. You mentioned that the space was deemed to be not economically viable prior to Steve's occupancy.
By the vendors who were in it.
All right. I guess my question would be, in an era that we all know, we've got budget cuts coming down the road, everything's tight post-secondary wise. If one of the motivating factors for that space is the amount of dollars that the university can bring in, would the faculty be willing to step up and subsidize or take some action to ensure someone like, not someone like Steve specifically, was the vendor in place? Is that something, I think I'd speak for everyone here that I would be willing, as a student of this faculty, to have some of my money, my tuition money, in some form going towards a cafe that was mine, what it is now.
I've been very sensitive to any of the financial considerations, and at a time when we're actually just through a long conversation, and a really important one, about the ways in which students are being asked to commit more to this faculty. I think it's important, and I've said consistently in terms of that broader dialogue, that the financial position of this faculty that I walked into last summer, and Scott and I had this conversation starting in August, was a huge challenge, to be sure. We are in a much, much better place as a result of both the outcome of that dialogue, the contributions by students, the work that I've been trying to do in terms of budget management here, and also, frankly, redoubling an effort to be out on the road around development. There had been a proposal, as I mentioned this morning, on CBC in 2010 for actually a physical reconfiguration of that space, but I believe at that point Steve was the centerpiece of it. I think the renovation costs, some of the plans, some of the drawings that were actually prepared at the time would have driven the cost of that renovation beyond not only a $500,000 contribution, but up to $1 million. And the individual alum who was very committed in that regard was in a sector that was hit by 2008, 2009, and so that didn't end up proceeding. I also understand, and this is one of the things, and again, I'm loath to get into details of a confidential lease arrangement, but one of the things that has been, I think, a commitment from the university actually is a lease arrangement that has been deeply discounted from other expectations. So that's one area where I tread very carefully and sensitively. I would like to see a resolution without actually having to turn to the students to fund it. Because I think that, for me, that's problematic. It's problematic when you're dealing with not only the constraints, but also those individuals here who are actually themselves financially strapped and making the commitment to come to pay their tuition, the books, the living expenses that relate to it. So I'm very conscious of all of that. I appreciate that everybody wants to sort of see and have thought about making a financial commitment. I'm not sure that in the discussions that have gone on to this point that financial issues I would put at the top of that list. I think there is an unfortunate misimpression that they're just trying to squeeze more dollars out of the space. I understand where that sentiment comes from. Let me just say again, the situation is complex. And there are a number of different considerations that actually come into play when you're looking at any kind of arrangement like we've got. And I would hope for, and it's certainly in terms of the discussions that I've been part of so far, that there's reason for optimism that we could move forward without having to actually require that or ask students for that. And certainly, for my part, there's no way that I would end up proceeding without a much more fulsome consultation. I appreciate that everybody here would be wanting to make that kind of financial commitment, but we would owe it to the entire student population as well. And what's also been interesting is that the number of alumni who have written in who are here as well, they may be willing to contribute if that were required, and I'm not saying that it is. If they were required, or there was a requirement for a contribution in that regard in order to resolve things, I think there are ways of actually making that work, and I'd be happy to work with students and others to facilitate that dialogue.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm very appreciative of the complexity of the discussions that you've mentioned and the sensitivity of the issues. My concern might be that in the end a decision that gets made, maybe it's a decision that we don't want, and then people hide behind confidentiality agreements and complexity and that sort of thing. Can we get some sort of undertaking or commitment that once a decision has been made, that as many facts as are necessary will be made available to us so that we understand what's going on? So,
as a lawyer myself, I'm very conscious of the importance of undertakings in that regard. Some of you may know I teach ethics and professional responsibility, so in that regard. Let me put it this way. My approach has been, as best possible throughout this year, to be as open and transparent as I can be. Dating back to the discussions that we had last fall around tuition increases, tuition proposals, that sort of thing. Everything was up on the website that I could put up there. Everything, 2 town halls, an open dialogue and discussion. That's, as best I can, my approach. I'm optimistic about an outcome that people will be happy with. So in that respect, at least, that's why I've said up on the website, it's a kind of watch this space. I'll provide as much information as I can, as I'm able to. I can't commit to more than that because of, again, you can appreciate that with different parties, different players in that respect. I hope things work going forward.
Hi. I just wanted to really quickly make a comment on how I think that this whole thing has really exposed that Steve is a really important and key emotional support in the law school. And I would just hope that Steve's role as a mental health initiative in the school, or as a friend or an emotional support, as something that has to do with the mental health and wellness of the student body, is something that should be conveyed. I just wanted to make that noted.
Sure. I don't know whether you want to address that. I'd actually like to address that because it's a really important point. And I think it's important in terms of the dialogue and discussion around mental health issues that we're having. I'm very proud of what the LSA has done. This is part of Scott's platform, campaign platform last year. And the LSA Mental Health and Wellness Committee has actually taken a really strong and lead role in both articulating the importance of mental health and wellness for students and actually taking solid action to try and make talk real by way of a variety of supports that have been profiled on the website that I've put forward for other recognition that I'm hoping will end up coming through. I've also been in constant dialogue with Marion DeSusan from ASSIST, which is the joint effort by the CBA, the Law Society of Alberta, and other lawyers in terms of actually providing very direct counseling, psychological counseling, and direct mental health supports that actually all students can access. And so one of the things that I've been working on as well is part of the market modifier discussion. It's part of my discussions with ASSIST. Not in a position to be able to announce anything more formal yet, but again, watch this space. One of the things that I've been trying to work towards is actually on-site psychological counseling services that you can avail yourselves of. That's formal. And one of the things that I'm very conscious of, having written about mental health issues and stigma around mental health discussions, is how important that kind of very solid directed support is for the serious issues that so many in our community, not only in the law school but in the legal community, are confronting. Whether it's major depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, all sorts of other issues that end up affecting people at various stages along the way. The rates of suicide are also startling. And one of the things as well that I've been working on this year, actually arising out of the 2004 alumni reunion, I was in dialogue with the parents of a grad from 2004 who committed suicide 5 years later. And I'm actually working with the parents. They've agreed, they're people of very modest circumstances, but they wanted to start something in memory of their son, who wrote about his time at U of A Law as one of the happy times of his life. And so in honoring his memory, I'm actually trying to raise $100,000 right now in a memorial fund that would actually go to support mental health and wellness initiatives. His class and some key players in his class are actually very committed to that. So all of these prongs are really important in terms of a focus on mental health and wellness. The university's had a focus on that, but I'm really intent on making sure that it's specific to this community. The stresses of being a law student, the stresses of being a lawyer are finally part of an open conversation with the bar, with the bench, and amongst legal educators. And I think what the LSA's Mental Health and Wellness Committee is doing is leading in that regard. And I think it's important for us to continue to work on all of those. All of which is to say, in terms of what I described, or some described as the kind of pastoral care that Steve is providing, the kind of wellness support that makes, again, I don't want to go back into particular domestic relations, but that means that you are seeing a friendly face in the morning. That is an important anchor and part of your experience here. I mean, look around the room. Read the comments around 1,400 signatures. Read some of the many emails that talk about that, and that's been an easy message for me to convey. But it's part of a larger piece, and I apologize for going on about it, but it's something that I'm really passionate about. That's really important, I think, for this community, and frankly for all lawyers to be talking about, because for so long there was a stigma attached to it that said you could never actually reveal yourself and get the help. And it's really heartening to know that these students are leading the way in terms of making sure that the foundation's being laid here for that to be successful later on. So thanks for the question.
Yeah, I'd just like to bring the discussion back to the cafe and Steve itself. The university is great in that it does have, it allows all students access to formal supports, and it's super, super awesome that you guys are working on that too and opening that discussion. At the same time, that stigma does exist, and it is super, super awesome that there are these social, casual, informal ways of just knowing that we are supported in this environment and that we are human and appreciated. And I'd just like to reiterate, as you were saying, just how rare that is and how special that is, that you guys have that. I'm actually a fine arts student. I'm not in this faculty. And neither is she. And I have lots of friends in fine arts.
Welcome.
Thank you. No, but in the fine arts building, music, like drama, we will go to Hub, get money out, and so that we can come here to Hello My Friend Cafe because there is that sense of, it's not just getting coffee, it's getting a hot coffee and saying hello and knowing that we're appreciated as human beings and that there are people out there that care about us. So I just like to reiterate the importance of that, and also emphasize that it's this isn't even a law issue, because Steve has had an impact beyond the faculty of law. So. Well,
thank you for emphasizing that, because so far at least. So far, at least, the singular focus has been from law students, from law alumni, from law professors, from law staff. And so to know that this is important and part of a university experience is something that I can also work on conveying, and I think is a really important message. So thank you for bringing it.
Is there anything you can tell us about what the university's concerns about the space are, or how they feel it needs to be changed? I think students might appreciate a bit more if we knew what the issues were about Hello My Friend Cafe, and then we could work at addressing those.
Yeah, I'm actually, unfortunately, not in a position to be able to discuss those.
As an alumnus year of 2011, I'm kind of right smack dab in the middle of the group of people who have been impacted by him. And I do hope that your new Director of Development and Alumni Relations does see this as a really great opportunity. Those of us who are in that little curve, it's very difficult to mobilize us to give gifts to the university. I get called and I see on my call display that it's the University of Alberta calling. I don't pick up the phone. I go to...
We'll make sure they call block the next time.
I go to some of the events. If my firm buys a ticket, my slacktivism ends with Steve. I show up here, and if development is asking me to open my wallet for a legacy project to make sure that cafe continues, I'll be there, first in line.
So I don't want to reiterate, I'm obviously very concerned about Steve and Hello My Friend Cafe, and I think that we should have a cafe in there, and I think it should be Steve. But one of the concerns that I have is that if they are going to put in some other form of a store, like this was more of a concern when it was a Starbucks, they're obviously not, I wouldn't think that they would put in a store like that if it wasn't open to the public. For me, I find that studying in the Gavel has been a big part of what I do. It's somewhere where I can go at any hour of the night as long as the school is open, where the classrooms might not be and when the library is very busy. So my concern would be that we would be losing another space for students to study in. Do you have any comments as to what's going to happen? Are we going to lose the Gavel if this should go through?
I think it's important to actually focus on a positive outcome at this stage, and so I'm not going to speculate about the what-ifs. Let me tell you, though, that what I've actually been focusing on very much is making sure that if the space is at all to be repurposed, redeployed, that it has to be done if that becomes necessary, in consultation not only with the faculty, but to make sure that the students who are most affected are actually consulted in part of that dialogue. And so in that respect, at least, I'm committed to that. And let's just say that I have an appreciation for the Gavel, the space, the way that students end up using it, the way that, meaning everything from the LSA Kids Christmas Party on through study space, through hangout space. Alumni reunions happen there, people gravitate there right away, and so in that regard, at least, we even let in others from other faculties. In dealing with the space, it's going to be important to have a real consultation about it. And one of the things that, again, I think in terms of the use of space in a building, I want to make sure that we are, first and foremost, and the needs of this law school community, and the law school students in particular, are taken into account first and foremost.
I actually just had a quick comment because I know there's a lot of alumni in the audience. One thing that I had been seeing on Facebook and Twitter, like the petition, the emails, it's all perfect. But I've seen a lot of alumni say the words, if Steve's gone or if this keeps up, my alumni donations are out the door. And Steve was actually conveying that this is the one thing that he does not want to see, this type of damage to the institution, because also recognize it's not giving donation or not sponsorship dollars to the university. A lot of those sponsorship dollars end up going to financial needs scholarships, so helping students out. So Steve did not want to see that type of outcome from these discussions, so I just briefly wanted to address that. And if you're donating to the General University, you're donating to the wrong spot, donate to the faculty. This is, yeah.
Hi. I just wanted to say that I really appreciate the fact that we're having a town hall about this. It's something that I really care about, and I know everyone else does too. But one of my questions is, and maybe I just had a misunderstanding, and I think that's what happened, but why are there, why aren't there any other university administrators here today? Part of my concern is that they're the people who don't really understand what the importance of Steve is, and so I'm just wondering if you could talk maybe about why they're not here.
Sure. I had a conversation with representatives from facilities and operations, I think by way of the dialogue in that regard. I understand why they're not here. It may not optically look really good, but I think in the context of a discussion and a negotiation, neither of the two parties that are directly engaged and is here. And I think in part as well, what I offered to do was actually convey the messages back. And so in that respect, at least, be sure that you're heard. Be sure that you are heard, and I can, that's on me in terms of being responsible for making sure that facilities and operations and the university administration, they're very well aware of this. People have been writing, they've heard me in the press, they're sick of me in the press on this and other issues. But in terms of actually advocating to them, I'm not going to fault them in that regard, and they knew as this was an open forum in that regard, and I respect their decision, and I will be conveying back all of the messages, the petition and otherwise. And that's where, in part as well, I understand your concern and the perspective. I'm trying to work on a constructive solution that everybody's going to actually be happy with in that regard, and that involves them. So while I ask for your trust and faith and confidence in that regard, I ask for your patience as well.
Yeah, so I had a brief question. I mean, great stock is set by, how community-oriented the university is. So every time a new class comes in or prospective students come here, somebody from LSA tells them, you should come to UFA because we care about each other. I've been here a year now, and I can honestly say that it is true. People here are kind, they are generous, they do look after each other. What's equally true is that Steve's a very important part of this community. So for the university now to tell him to pack his bags and bugger off, it would somehow belittle that assertion. So when 2017 prospective class comes in and LSA tells them, oh no, you should come to UFA because we care about each other, it somehow vitiates that. So I'm just wondering, how is that feeding into the discussions? Because there's more at stake here than just Steve, and of course he's a great guy, he should stay, but is that factoring into the discussions that are being held at all?
I can tell you what I've conveyed, and I can speak to what I've conveyed, and that's actually in part the community message around that. I think it's important to understand as well that there is a huge outpouring of support. There are some differences of opinion, and I have to respect some of those as well, and so in that regard at least, it's a challenge. One of the things that's concerned me a little bit on not the petition itself, but some of the commentary that was starting to come in was the negative aspects of almost a mob mentality. I'm not going to call it that, but you can see how things will start to spiral. And so my focus has been on the positive part of the equation, and to convey to them that, look, you may not know the law school as well. This is not simply just a question in that regard, and I think they're very sensitive to that. Part of it also is maybe miscommunication, miscommunication and misunderstanding, and that's where, and I appreciate the comment about a forum. That's why I believe in this kind of dialogue. I think it works much more productively when we gather and have that kind of conversation on this and other issues. I'm looking forward to town halls where we're not just dealing with controversy, but constructively talking about the law school going forward. This is part of that, though, and I think that sense of community is something that's been really reinforced from students, faculty, staff, and alumni. But there are sensitivities in all of those quarters that need to be respected.
If I could just
Sure.
So from the petition posts that I've read, I think the worst one I saw was someone said, shame on you to the university, which I don't know how serious we take that in our culture, but that's the worst thing I saw. I think there was also some comments about, we're disappointed that this has happened, we're sad that this has happened. Obviously those are negative things. So the petition I think has been pretty good, so we should try and keep it that way. And I would also just remind people then on Facebook and on Twitter and on any other social media networks that you might use, also try and keep it in line with that tone, with that optimism and that positive, the energy that we have right now, you know, that's basically love, right? And this is what Steve feels. And this is just gratitude towards him. And we want to make sure that that's conveyed as effectively and purely as possible, because I'm going to be presenting this to him. I'm going to be handing him this petition when it's all printed out. You know, it's going to be like 150 pages. It's like $20 of printing. And he's going to read it and have this at the end of the day to look at and to be like, wow, you know, I did make a difference here. I do make a difference here. And that's how he makes us feel. So we want to make sure he feels that way as well. So we just want to keep it as positive as possible so he can really get that message communicated to him as clearly and as convincingly as possible, okay? Thanks.
Just one other comment in response, and I think this is also an important part of what I was just referencing, is that, you know, there are constituencies that are all part of this community and that have to be respected as part of this entire dialogue. And so in that regard, at least, what I'm attempting to do is ensure that all of them are respected, that the strength of conviction that's been expressed here, as well as any kind of dissenting views, are conveyed. And in that respect, at least, working on a constructive solution that actually respects all of those interests, all of those concerns. Not an easy task in the kind of context that we're talking about, but you know, the messages and the opportunities for miscommunication are certainly there, and I think it's important that we overcome them.
Before my question, I just had a comment for Andrea. Afterwards, I'm sure one of us will give you a card. We'd be happy to donate the printing cost for that for the petition. Dean, I just had a quick question, and I understand the difficulties with confidentiality and everything else. I'm just curious if there are actual plans, if things, like, it would be terrible to lose Steve, but it would be a travesty if we lost Steve and there was nothing done. So I'm just wondering if the university actually has an idea of what they want to do with the space at all. Just a confirmation of that would be nice if you can.
I think it best that I actually not comment except from my perspective, to say that I don't know of any plans. I have not been made aware of any plans, and that if any planning were to be done, I would want to be part of that planning directly and to make sure that the consultations that I've talked about take place.
And I'm not sure if anyone else. I'm here. Oh. Go ahead. Can you hear me? Okay. Paul, I think you deserve some credit here in a number of different ways. First of all, your instincts were to call a meeting right away. This isn't the meeting that was originally envisioned, but this is a meeting at the town hall, so thank you for doing that. I want to congratulate you also for your incredible restraint.
It's to these guys as well, actually.
Okay.
Bruce. Thank you.
Fine. Good work, boys. I want to commend you on your restraint, because I think what the university has done on your watch is outrageous. A few minutes ago, when you were talking, you explained how Steve first came in under Dean Percy's administration. I remember him talking to various vendors. He chose Steve. He chose Steve. You mentioned as well, unless I've got this wrong, that Dean Bryden re-upped in 2012. Dean Bryden. And now the university at this stage doesn't even consult you. I think it's good self-restraint. Secondly, the university is not even here today. That's been pointed out. They have their reasons. And we've seen a number of different questions raised. What are the university's plans? We don't know. You can't say. You don't feel your liberty to say. I want to commend you also for the conciliatory approach you're taking with them, trying to negotiate, and you're confident that you're moving in the right direction. and that you're going to tell them what the mood of the room is. And I understand you want to be conciliatory. Thankfully, I don't have to be for that reason. Now, this isn't a speech, it's actually leading to something. They said Steve had a lease of a set term with no right of renewal. It came to an end, so be it. I teach property law, I know they're right. They're relying on the law. So we ask ourselves, what law can we rely on? And I wonder this, not knowing about it. I know the university is subject to the Freedom of Information Act, that we can ask for documents if we have standing to do so. We can have those documents disclosed if we follow all the protocols, the rights, get past all the exceptions, and Lord knows. I've said several things, I may be wrong about all of them, I don't know. But when you convey to the university what what the responses were in the room, if I am right, then anybody in this room, at least anybody who's part of the university, may well have standing to answer those questions that were posed earlier. And I would like to find out myself why they think it's in the best interest of the university and the best interest of the law school to do what they're planning to do, because we are doubtful that they've made the right call. Now, as I say, there may be all sorts of stuff they are not required to disclose, but they are founding their position on the law, and so should we. And that's what we do. We're in the justice game, and we use the law to advance our position.
Let me ask this, and I understand where you're coming from in that regard. Afford me the space to do what I'm hoping to do without going there. I think it's important at this stage that, in particular, given the sensitivities and otherwise, that we start not engaging in, if we wanted to turn this into, remember, I was a commercial litigator, there is no good that will come of that end in that regard, in my vision. And so in that respect, at least, I understand what you're saying. I'm going to ask you for some restraint. I know it's hard, Bruce. We've known each other not that long, but I get the sense and sensitivity. But I think in this context and respect, for respect for us, for respect for Steve, in terms of the dialogue that I'm trying to engage in with everybody constructively, allow me the space to focus on that. And know as well that while I'm in an extremely difficult position, having come into a situation, having tried to work through a situation and trying to focus on a constructive resolution to a situation, I would rather actually work with, and again, if you had to put numbers on this, I'm not going to predict the provincial election, but I think in terms of my own chances here, I'd like to say I'm at 95%. I'm really optimistic. And so I understand and appreciate why you might be looking that way. Those who are privacy experts will start looking up all the exceptions to all of that. Again, it's a case where, having lived through already some Freedom of Information Act extravaganzas, that's something that I think in this kind of context, given the individuals and given the respect for Steve that's communicated in the room as well, let's hold off.
Okay, thank you. I will.
Thank you.
I just have a couple of comments here. First, as an alumnus, there's a bunch of us here, but I also wanted to underscore that there's a lot of us who are following it who aren't here. For all of those who might have just written their first year exams or who are still through the process, if you think you're going to be home at 5 p.m. each day, you should probably reconsider. There's going to be a surprise. So we've made an effort to be here. There's others who couldn't, some of whom are as far away as Quebec and so forth.
Sure.
So there is a lot of groundswell. But the other thing I wanted to address is sort of the call for calm. And I understand you're basically, if I'm reading between the lines here, it's please don't blow up our negotiations. And I understand that, but I think it's equally important to sort of convey that people are going to have whatever emotions they're going to have. People are emotionally invested in this. And if the goal is, at the end of the day, to have everyone feeling calm and collected and cheerful and positive, what's going to matter is not just the results of this, but also the process.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be people looking for transparency. There's people ultimately going to be wondering, was this given the fair process that we expect? And as lawyers and aspiring lawyers, I think fairness and process are things that we highly value. So I'd like to sort of urge the administration to consider that in terms of how they take this forward.
I appreciate that and noted. Again, as I've indicated, I've learned a lot from being here and working through all of these issues, and I think in terms of the approach that I'm trying to take is focused very much on, ensuring a positive end and outcome right now, and that in terms of me going forward by way of process concerns, I'm taking those into account, learning a lot, and we'll try and do things differently and better.
Is this on? Cool. So I'm not a law student. I'm actually at the French faculty. I don't speak as eloquently as most of you, but what I'd like to know is if there's anything else I, as a student who really appreciate coming here and being able to see Steve, especially for the mental health benefits, like that was why I got sent there, was a friend was saying, you're having a bad day, you need somebody to talk to, go meet Steve. So I did, and 3 days a week, whenever I'm at the French faculty, I come over here on my way home. It's not even on my way home, it's the exact opposite direction. And I still come all the way over here. I want to know, as a student, other than signing the petition and showing up here and sharing my comments and concerns, if there's anything else I can do.
First off, I don't think you've got any problem with eloquence.
Thanks.
Second, at this stage, I think the message is by virtue of your presence, by virtue of the signatures on the petition, on the various emails that are in, the message is being conveyed in loud and strong. If I need to, I'll work with the LSA, I'll work with others to advise as to what more can be done. But I think, again, from my perspective, your being here is really important, and the message that not only law students are affected, but there are others in the community who are really valuing what Steve offers and can, hopefully will continue to offer, is really important. But thank you for the offer. We're at 6:15. I think in terms of the session itself, let me actually offer my thanks to you for coming. To those of you who have written, signed, otherwise conveyed your support, from my perspective, know that it's heard, and know that I've conveyed it, and know that those I am speaking to in the administration are committed to working out a solution that I think everybody's going to be happy with. And in that respect, at least, your visible presence here really matters. I appreciate Bruce's comments. Again, I think it's always important to make sure that we can gather as a community and have that kind of dialogue. So thank you very much for coming. I'll hang back afterwards as well. I don't know whether you guys are open to that, and we can talk one-on-one if you'd like, but otherwise, thank you very much for attending. For those of you who are watching, thank you very much for being here.